There are moments in life when silence hurts more than pain. Pain has a voice, loss has words, even struggle announces itself clearly. But silence leaves space, and that space can feel unbearable. When God is silent, the heart often jumps to one conclusion: I've been forgotten. This thought doesn't arrive loudly. It settles quietly, slowly, almost unnoticed. At first you wait patiently. You tell yourself that answers will come, that clarity will arrive, but days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and heaven remains quiet. In 2026, many people are living in this space, not rejecting faith, not abandoning belief, just waiting and wondering. Silence has a way of making faith feel fragile. It whispers questions the heart never wanted to ask. Did I do something wrong? Did God move on? Was my prayer not enough? These questions do not mean faith is failing. They mean faith is being stretched. One of the most painful misunderstandings in spiritual life is equating silence with abandonment. But silence and abandonment are not the same. Abandonment implies absence. Silence often implies closeness without explanation. God's silence does not mean he has withdrawn his care. It means he is working in a way that cannot be heard yet. The heart struggles with this because silence removes control. It offers no reassurance, no timeline, no confirmation. And yet, silence has always been part of how God works. Throughout history, before every moment of clarity, there was waiting. Before direction, there was uncertainty. Before restoration, there was stillness. Silence forces faith to confront its foundation. Is faith built on answers or on trust? Is belief sustained by outcomes or by relationship? When God is quiet, faith is invited to move deeper, not louder, not more dramatic, but more rooted. Silence strips away surface-level belief. It removes faith that depends on constant validation. It leaves behind something more honest, faith that says, I don't understand, but I remain. In silence, God is not asking you to figure everything out. He is asking you to stay, and staying requires courage. It is easier to walk away when answers don't come. It is easier to assume abandonment than to sit with uncertainty. But faith that stays in silence is faith that learns endurance. If God feels quiet right now, it does not mean he has turned his back. It may mean he is closer than you think, working where words would only interfere. Silence is not the end of the relationship. It is often where the relationship deepens. Silence often feels like loss, but sometimes silence is protection. When God does not respond the way we expect, the heart assumes neglect. Yet many times what feels like distance is actually restraint. In 2026, we live in a culture that values immediate answers. Decisions are rushed, opinions are instant, silence feels dangerous. But spiritual wisdom moves differently. God's silence can be a form of mercy. There are answers we are not ready to carry, truths that would overwhelm instead of heal, directions that would harm if given too soon. Silence slows the process, not to punish, but to protect. If God were to speak before the heart is prepared, faith could collapse under the weight of clarity. Protection often looks like delay. Silence creates space for the heart to mature. It prevents faith from being built on impulse. It guards against decisions driven by fear rather than trust. Many prayers are sincere, but not all timing is safe. When God remains quiet, he may be shielding you from outcomes you cannot yet see. This is difficult to accept because protection does not feel comforting at first. It feels like being left without guidance. It feels like standing still while life moves forward. But stillness has purpose. Silence forces reflection. It slows emotional reactions. It allows wisdom to develop quietly. In silence, faith learns discernment. Instead of reacting to every feeling, the heart learns how to wait. Instead of demanding direction, faith learns how to trust. Protection also means preventing premature closure. Sometimes silence keeps the heart open longer, open to growth, open to transformation, open to becoming someone new. God may not be withholding answers. He may be preserving you, preserving your peace, preserving your future, preserving the work He is doing inside you. This kind of silence requires patience. It asks faith to believe that God sees further than we do. Protection is rarely obvious in the moment. It is recognized later when the heart realizes how fragile it once was. Looking back, many people understand, if God had answered me then, I would not have been ready. Silence protected what needed time. If you are waiting right now and God feels quiet, consider this possibility. You are not being ignored. You are being guarded. The absence of answers does not mean the absence of care. It may mean care expressed in restraint. Silence can be an act of love, and love sometimes chooses quiet over explanation. If God is silent today, it may be because He is protecting something sacred, your heart. Silence has a way of revealing where trust truly lives. When God speaks clearly, trust feels simple, direction feels safe, dependence feels comfortable. But when God is silent, trust is no longer supported by clarity. It must stand on something deeper. In seasons of silence, faith is gently asked a question. Do you trust me for who I am, or only for what I provide? This question is never spoken aloud, but it echoes quietly in the heart. Silence reshapes trust by removing substitutes. We often depend on signs, confirmations, emotions, and outcomes more than we realize. When these disappear, faith feels exposed. But exposure is not destruction, it is refinement. Silence removes the habit of relying on constant reassurance. It teaches faith how to rest without proof. Dependence begins to shift. Instead of depending on answers, faith begins to depend on presence. Instead of leaning on certainty, the heart learns how to lean on character. This is uncomfortable at first. Trust without reinforcement feels risky. Dependence without evidence feels vulnerable. Yet this vulnerability is where spiritual strength is formed. In 2026, many people struggle with control. Not because they want power, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. Silence confronts this gently. It asks faith to release control without panic, to surrender outcomes without fear, to remain without knowing. This is not passive faith. It is courageous faith. Trust reshaped by silence becomes quieter, less demanding, more stable. It no longer needs to understand everything to remain faithful. Silence also teaches dependence on God rather than self. When answers are absent, the temptation is to rely entirely on logic, planning, or personal strength. But silence exposes the limits of self-reliance. It reminds the heart that faith was never meant to be carried alone. Dependence deepens not through certainty, but through humility. Admitting, I don't know what to do, is not weakness. It is an invitation for God to lead in ways unseen. Silence invites trust to slow down. It prevents rushed decisions. It protects against fear-driven choices. It allows wisdom to grow quietly. Over time, faith notices something changing. Trust becomes less anxious. Dependence becomes less frantic. Waiting becomes less threatening. Not because silence ends quickly, but because the heart becomes steadier. Silence reshapes trust by teaching faith how to remain even when it feels unsupported. It teaches dependence without desperation. And this kind of trust lasts. If your faith feels quieter now, more reflective, less reactive, that is not loss. That is trust being reshaped. Silence is not pulling faith apart, it is rebuilding it from the inside. Silence often feels like erosion, like something slowly wearing faith away. But silence does not weaken faith, it reveals its strength. When God is silent, faith is forced to stand without support, no reassurance, no explanation, no visible progress. And yet faith remains. This is not accidental. Strength is not formed through constant comfort. It is formed through resistance. Silence creates resistance. It challenges assumptions. It tests patience. It confronts fear. But resistance does not exist to destroy faith. It exists to strengthen it. In 2026, many people are discovering that the faith which survives silence is far stronger than the faith that depends on constant clarity. Silence removes fragile layers. It exposes faith that relies on emotional reinforcement. It removes belief built on convenience. It strips away expectations tied to control. What remains is faith rooted in commitment. This kind of faith does not need to be convinced every day. It does not collapse when feelings change. It does not walk away when answers delay. It stays. Silence strengthens faith by teaching endurance. Endurance is not dramatic, it is quiet, it is steady, it is patient. Faith that endures does not demand immediate relief. It learns how to carry uncertainty without resentment. Silence also strengthens discernment. When answers are absent, faith learns to listen more carefully. Not every thought is trusted, not every emotion is followed. Faith becomes selective. It responds rather than reacts. This discernment protects the heart from impulsive decisions. Another strength silence produces is resilience. Faith shaped by silence is not easily shaken. It has already survived doubt. It has already walked through confusion. It has already remained when clarity was missing. Because of this, future challenges feel different. Not easier, but less threatening. Silence also strengthens faith by deepening perspective. When immediate answers disappear, faith begins to see beyond the moment. It learns to trust long-term outcomes. It learns patience with the process. It learns peace with the unknown. This perspective reduces fear. Fear thrives on immediacy. Faith thrives on endurance. Silence creates the space where fear loses its power. If your faith feels heavier now, it may be because it is stronger. Strength carries weight, and weight is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of capacity. Silence does not remove God from the equation. It removes distractions. It allows faith to grow in ways noise never could. If God feels quiet, it does not mean your faith is shrinking. It may be expanding, slowly, deeply, permanently. Silence changes how time feels. Minutes stretch, days feel heavier, waiting becomes personal. When God is silent, patience is no longer theoretical. It becomes lived experience. Most people value patience in principle, but struggle with it in practice. Waiting feels unproductive. Silence feels inefficient. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Yet faith has always required patience, not the passive kind, but the patient endurance that continues trusting even when nothing seems to move. Silence teaches patience by slowing everything down. It removes urgency driven by fear. It interrupts rushed expectations. It forces the heart to sit with the present moment. In 2026, this lesson is more necessary than ever. We live in a world that rewards speed, fast decisions, quick results, immediate gratification. But spiritual growth does not follow that rhythm. Silence realigns faith with God's timing. Timing is not about delay, it is about readiness. God's timing accounts for what you cannot yet see. Internal growth, emotional preparation, spiritual maturity. Silence gives these things space to develop. Patience learned through silence is not weak, it is disciplined. It teaches faith to remain steady without forcing outcomes. It prevents decisions made out of anxiety. It guards the heart from disappointment rooted in unrealistic timelines. Silence also teaches trust in unseen progress. Just because nothing appears to be happening does not mean nothing is happening. Growth often occurs beneath the surface. Like roots forming underground, the most important developments remain invisible for a time. Silence trains faith to believe in unseen work. It teaches the heart to trust God's pace rather than demanding its own. This kind of patience reduces fear. Fear thrives on urgency. Patience restores calm. When faith stops racing ahead, peace has room to enter. Silence also reshapes expectations. Instead of asking, "When will this end?" faith learns to ask, "What is being formed in me right now?" This shift transforms waiting from punishment into participation. Waiting becomes purposeful. Silence does not mean doing nothing. It means trusting actively, trusting that God's timing is intentional, trusting that readiness matters more than speed, trusting that some things require waiting to be sustained. If answers arrive too early, they might collapse under unprepared faith. Silence protects timing by aligning growth with capacity. Over time, faith learns something unexpected. Waiting becomes less threatening. Silence becomes less intimidating, not because answers arrive quickly, but because patience has taken root. Faith that learns patience through silence is not easily rushed later. It understands that timing matters, that preparation matters, that growth cannot be forced. If you are still waiting, still trusting, still holding space for what has not yet come, your patience is not wasted. It is shaping you to receive what is meant to last. Silence does more than test faith. It reshapes identity. When God is quiet, distractions fall away. Roles lose their weight. External validation fades, and the question slowly rises. Who am I when nothing is confirmed? This is one of the most uncomfortable moments in the spiritual journey. Many people build identity around outcomes, around productivity, around answered prayers, around visible progress. But silence removes these markers. It leaves the soul alone with itself. In 2026, this moment is becoming increasingly common. The world no longer offers stable definitions of success, purpose, or worth. And silence forces faith to look inward rather than outward. At first, this feels disorienting. Without feedback, the heart feels uncertain. Without affirmation, confidence wavers. Without answers, identity feels fragile. But silence is not meant to erase identity, it is meant to clarify it. When God is silent, faith begins to detach from performance. You are no longer defined by how strong you feel, or how confident you appear, or how quickly things resolve. Silence gently teaches this truth. Your worth is not measured by outcomes. Faith stops trying to prove itself. Identity stops trying to earn meaning. Instead, something quieter emerges. Identity rooted in being rather than doing. Silence reveals that you are still valuable even when nothing is happening, still loved even when nothing is explained, still seen even when nothing is affirmed. This realization changes how faith operates. You stop striving for reassurance. You stop chasing confirmation. You stop measuring yourself by visible results. Silence teaches the soul how to exist without applause, and this is where freedom begins. Identity shaped by silence becomes grounded. It does not rise and fall with circumstances. It does not collapse when expectations fail. It does not depend on constant validation. It rests. Silence also reveals hidden motivations. It exposes the parts of faith that sought security rather than relationship. It uncovers desires for control rather than trust. This exposure is not condemnation, it is healing. By bringing these motives into awareness, silence allows faith to mature honestly. Identity becomes simpler, less driven by fear, less shaped by comparison, more aligned with truth. Silence also transforms how you see yourself before God. You stop approaching Him only as someone who needs answers. You begin to approach Him as someone who belongs. Belonging does not require explanation. It requires presence, and silence makes space for that presence to be felt without words. If this season feels like you are being stripped down, it is not to diminish you. It is to reveal who you are without layers. What remains after silence is often more authentic than what existed before. If you feel quieter now, less driven, more reflective, that is not loss. That is identity settling into something more stable. Silence is not removing who you are, it is refining it. Silence does not only reshape faith, it reshapes relationships. When God is silent, the way you relate to Him begins to change, and so does the way you relate to others. At first, silence can feel relationally distant. Prayer feels one-sided. Connection feels fragile. Intimacy feels harder to sense. But over time, something subtle happens. Faith stops approaching God only for answers and begins approaching Him for presence. This is a significant shift. Many relationships are built around communication, words, feedback, response, but the deepest relationships are not sustained by words alone. They are sustained by trust. Silence teaches faith how to remain present even when communication feels limited. You stop measuring closeness by how much you hear and start recognizing closeness by how much you stay. This transforms prayer. Prayer becomes less about asking and more about being, less about explaining and more about sitting. Silence invites faith into companionship rather than conversation, and this changes everything. Your relationship with God becomes quieter but also more secure. You no longer feel the need to fill every moment with words. You become comfortable with stillness. You learn that presence itself is meaningful. This quiet confidence spills into human relationships as well. Silence increases empathy. Those who have waited understand waiting. Those who have felt unseen recognize quiet pain in others. Faith shaped by silence becomes gentler. It listens more. It interrupts less. It judges less quickly. Silence removes the urge to fix everything. When you have lived without answers, you stop offering easy explanations to others. You learn to sit with people in their uncertainty rather than rushing them toward solutions. This is a rare kind of compassion. Silence also reduces performance in relationships. You stop feeling the need to appear strong all the time. You become more comfortable admitting uncertainty. You allow space for honesty. Faith becomes less about appearing certain and more about being present. This authenticity deepens connection. Silence teaches that relationships do not require constant proof to remain real. Presence matters more than perfection. It also changes expectations. You stop demanding immediate understanding from others because you have learned how long understanding can take. Patience grows, grace expands. Faith that has walked through silence treats others with more kindness because it knows how heavy waiting can feel. Even disagreements feel different. Silence teaches restraint. It teaches listening. It teaches response over reaction. This does not weaken conviction. It strengthens wisdom. Your relationship with God becomes anchored in trust. Your relationships with others become anchored in compassion. Silence simplifies love. Less urgency, less fear, more steadiness. If you notice that you have become calmer with people, more patient with differences, more willing to listen, this is not accidental. Silence has shaped your heart. It has taught you how to remain connected even when clarity is missing, and that ability is a gift. Silence has a way of convincing the heart that nothing else will come. When answers delay, when clarity feels distant, when waiting stretches longer than expected, it is easy to believe that this quiet moment is the final chapter. But silence is never the end of the story. It is a passage, not a conclusion. Faith that has walked through silence comes to understand this truth slowly, not through explanation, but through endurance. In 2026, many people are learning that life does not unfold through constant resolution. Some seasons remain unresolved longer than others. Some questions stay unanswered for reasons we may never fully grasp. And yet, faith continues, not because everything makes sense, but because something deeper holds it together. Silence does not mean God has stopped writing. It means the story is still forming beneath the surface. Growth rarely announces itself. Transformation rarely demands attention. The most important changes often happen quietly. Silence prepares the heart for what words alone cannot sustain. When God speaks again, and He will, faith shaped by silence hears differently. It listens with patience. It receives without fear. It recognizes wisdom more easily, because it has learned how to wait. Faith that survives silence does not return to noise, desperate for reassurance. It carries peace, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of trust. This peace does not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. It rests in the knowledge that God has been present all along, even in the quiet, even in the waiting, even when nothing seemed to move. If you are still here, still listening, still holding space for faith, that matters. Remaining is not weakness, it is devotion. And devotion shapes the future in ways the present cannot yet reveal. Silence has not diminished your faith, it has refined it. It has taught you patience, deepened your trust, softened your heart, and strengthened your spirit. The story continues, not always with immediate answers, but with steady guidance, not always with clarity, but with presence. And presence is enough to carry faith forward. As you move on from this message, you don't need to rush clarity. You don't need to force understanding. You can carry this truth quietly with you. Even in silence, you are not abandoned. Faith remains, and so does God.